and your openness to, man, we just have to keep open and growing and open. And, oh, this is a possibility. Oh, yeah. To 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 embrace what we are unfamiliar with and embrace what we may have felt limited about in the past, and see how it fits for us at this point in our life.
This week's special guest is the sexual shaman, Kenneth Ray Stubbs. Ray's life is an amazing story, from working in a porn theater, his hippie traveling days, studying massage, and then self-publishing books on erotic massage and sexuality, plus so much more. We'll dive into so many topics, like manhood, relationships, and approaching sexuality in a spiritual way.
1, 2, 3, 4.
You're listening to the Revive Couple Podcast. We're Michael and Laura, and together we'll explore everything relationships, personal responsibility, feminine and masculine dynamics, communication, and just some all-around real and raw conversations.
Drawing from our 18 years together, with a bit of sarcasm, humor, tears, a few f***s, and lots of love, we deep dive into the male and female perspectives on relationships and navigating the highs and lows of life together. Sit back, grab your love mug, and let's get into today's conversation.
Right on. I'm excited to have you on, Ray. I have so many topics that I want to dive into and just hear your perspective on, like manhood, relationships, and approaching sexuality in a spiritual way. But before we get into all that, why don't you give us a bit of your story and just how you got to where you are today?
All right, I'm 78. Started out in Fayetteville, North Carolina, as a Southern Baptist, semi-rural background. My mother sent me to outside the county into city schools, and I liked school and eventually got a PhD. But I went to college to major in music because I was sort of top gun in my high school with music. I got to a very good university of the music school, and I was not so hot compared to everyone else. So I went into sociology and psychology and anthropology. Eventually got a master's degree in that, left that, did my hippie trip, and moved to San Francisco, which I call the University of Life. It was in 1973. And the first job I got was working at the Saturday night movies at a sort of upscale theater. The San Francisco Art Institute was there. And so a lot of students would come there and on Saturday night movies for the art movies, the avant-garde movies. But during the day and the other days, guess what they played? Porn. This was San Francisco in 1973. So it was the success of Deep Throat that suddenly I had many more hours to work. Punching tickets. So this was San Francisco in the sexual liberation days, working in a porn theater. But I just come from doing my hippie trip, planting trees in Idaho, picking apples and pears in Washington State, picking cherries in Montana, going down to Mexico and studying at the Centro de Artes y Lenguas, studying Spanish in Mexico. So it was the on the road hippie lifestyle for certain. Moved to San Francisco, coming to this new lifestyle. I'm centered, and it was like University of Life, like I said. So I started taking classes in all sorts of things. And because I went to massage school, I felt that the massage profession was really in a sex negative perspective, and I know that when I took a few classes before I went to massage school, I figured that most people, they'd be taking a massage class, which would not be focused on sexuality. But when they go home to the lover, guess what they would do? Apply the massage into their relationship, to their lovemaking, which is a very, very important skill or ability to develop in relationship with friends and with partner or lovers. And I eventually went to massage school. And like I said, I felt the massage profession was really limiting. So I started to teach something that I called erotic massage, which included all parts of the physical body. And it was for couples of all sexual orientations. That would have been around 1975. And I kept teaching that and learned a great deal. And because of my academic background and what I was teaching, I was invited to be on the faculty of the Institute for the Advanced Study of Human Sexuality, a graduate school in San Francisco, granting masters and doctorates in the emerging field of human sexuality. And again, this is 1973. Masters and Johnson came out with their famous human sexual response around 1966, and a whole new development around sex therapy and sex education was coming on that was not available when I was in undergrad and grad school. So I sort of started studying the field of Western sexology. But at the same time, the Eastern perspective of sexuality, we might call Tantra, which I use that in a very broad sense, became much more popular. And I was in I was in California where everything was cutting edge, and started taking some Tantra classes. And I started studying with a Tibetan Buddhist Lama, which Tibetan Buddhism is sometimes referred to as Vajrayana Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, or Tantric Buddhism, although very much different perspective of a more inclusive idea of Tantra than what was coming from India and what a lot of people were studying. So anyway, all this was were blending together. I was very much on my spiritual path while I was studying Tibetan Buddhism. I was working at this porn theater, teaching erotic massage, and these worlds of what we might call sexuality and what we might call spirituality, they didn't seem that different. The forms, yes, were different, but to me, more and more, it became a perspective of looking at the underlying, the bridge, conceptual bridge, was energy. It was all about developing our abilities to dance with the energy within. And so that's where I've pretty much gone. In 1991, I had a neck injury, became quadriplegic, so I couldn't teach like I was teaching. I shifted more to writing, and now I teach about energy, which includes spirituality and sexuality, though it doesn't look like either one necessarily. I teach over the internet, individual sessions with people. And so I don't know, that's some of the background. Some of the
Ray,
background.
there's so much to unpackage there. It's amazing, man. That's an unbelievable. I like the hippie journey, and then
Yeah.
work. Oh man, that's exciting. And then working in a porn shop, hopefully, or porn theater. Hopefully, they didn't have you cleaning the seats. I guess that'd be. Hopefully, you didn't
No,
have to do
I
that.
was
But
selling tickets and running the projector. For the first 2 weeks, it was like, and then after a while, ho hum, the same thing, different people doing the same thing. For me, the porn genre in general is really boring, boring. And I do not recommend porn as a genre. If someone likes to do that, fine. But for a while there, porn was being considered a form of sex education, and I said, no, that's not sex education. It's lacking in humanity in a lot, not all, a lot of what is in the porn genre. So I do not advocate watching porn unless that's your thing. People don't have the right to make it and to give it, but no, it's boring. To me, it's absolutely boring. After a while, first it was mind-boggling. And in fact, as you go into the training in Western sexology, a lot of the training has to do with getting past the charge on these different issues. And it's really important if we want to grow in many ways, but also to facilitate others as a sex educator, sex therapist, sex counselor. We really have to let go of our charge to allow other people to be at home with their sexuality. And because different people are different, and that's really, really important to accept. And so anyway, so I was getting some early sex education by working in a porn theater. And it gave me an income to study what I wanted to study, which is massage and Tibetan Buddhism and all the different seminars in San Francisco at the time.
No, absolutely. Well, now I know why you fly under the Sexual Shaman moniker. I mean, you got all that background. That's amazing, man. And there's so much in between all that, which is amazing. But when I say that with Sexual Shaman, what does that mean, Ray? Or like when you came up with that, what were you coining that as?
I knew a number of really awesome people in the San Francisco area who were in some ways sexuality practitioners, especially using a somatic approach rather than talk therapy. And I thought it'd be interesting. My self-conceptualization was that my life is about the reintegration of spirituality and sexuality. I'm just recording podcasts, which have not been released yet. I mean, the last week I've been recording other people, looking at sort of our ancient human history, where the religious and spiritual traditions didn't seem to make the same distinction of spirituality as being good and sexuality being profane or negative. It was like an integrated whole. The way it, as far as we can tell, looking at really ancient, I'm talking about going back 10,000 to 50,000 years or so. That's a generalization, of course. All right, so my sense is that to get back to the garden is to be the place where our sexual nature and our spiritual nature are really all, that's a conceptual duality. But we've made that duality, and I wanted to convey the idea that it'd be beneficial if somehow we get to this place where we did not make it into a duality, but sort of like an integrated whole. I would use the concept of reintegration of spirituality and sexuality. It seemed like it would go in one ear and out the other. So we came up with the idea, put sexuality practitioners who were really aware of their spirituality and came from a spiritual awareness space, and have them tell their story. So what came up was I envisioned, edited, contributed to, and published a book called Women of the Light, Women of the Light, the New Sacred Prostitute. And there were 9 women who, it was an anthology written by the 9 women with my introduction to each person, whom I knew personally, so I could give a context. And there were a wide range of practitioners and involved in sexuality. Anyway, what I did hear from some people that, well, the new sacred prostitute implied that some people doing prostitution were inherently evil. And given the social, cultural context, yeah, it until we decriminalize something we would call sexual services being available for money, we're going to have a really negative, limiting context. Given what's there, yes, some people go to that type of a role to make money, are not coming from the most enlightened space or intent, but it doesn't mean that what they're doing is bad or wrong. It's just the society makes it a rather shameful, negative activity. So the idea is the word sacred prostitute implies that they're prostitutes on the other side of the tracks, and making that division. And I thought that was a legitimate question. So I tried to find what's an alternative concept to sacred prostitute that really was conveying what I was trying to convey. And one day I came up with the word sexual shaman. Because theoretically, this is the story. In ancient times, whenever that was, the warrior would come back from war with all the traumas of war, and he's usually a he in that situation. What we would call PTSD now, all that was there. It was different languaging, different context. So what the idea was is oversimplification. It seems to be they would go to the temple and be with a priestess from a very different perspective than what we think of priest and priest today, and be bathed, fed, massaged, sort of having guidance and talking, as well as having sex. And that's a way of sort of washing away the horrors of war. And then they'd be in a much healthier space and go off and to now be back in the community with all of that, so much trauma. Well, that was a nice theory. I don't think that was happening in 24 hours. You could, if a person was really traumatized from war, and it was probably much more traumatic than it is today. None of it's good, but it's. But anyway, so I thought the only type of person could begin to really facilitate that transformation that extensively would look to me more like what we think of as a traditional shaman. But traditional shamanism, as we think of it, does not involve sexual activity. But the temple priestess might be involved in doing sexual activity, but have the energetic wherewithal to facilitate a much more intrinsic transformation. So, sexual shaman, alliteration, that sounds good. It captures people's imagination. So I started to use sexual shaman. I looked up later and found that had been used a few times in the internet, but I don't remember hearing it. So I did not coin the term, but I think I made it much more popular given my use of the term over time. Anyway, I now think of it as a metaphor. My experience of tantric teachers, people involved in somatic approaches to facilitate as a facilitator around sexuality, are nowhere nearly developed enough energetically to fulfill this role of what I call sexual shaman. So it's more of a metaphor that integrates this concept of spirituality and sexuality and says, this is all related, and that energy, the more intrinsic energy, is an underlying concept that integrates this so that we can get beyond that duality. Now, that's pretty abstract philosophical stuff. Did it make sense? At least the conception. I'm not saying you to believe it, but the conception, did that make sense?
I love it, Ray. I mean, it makes so much sense. And I mean, everything that you're packaging, everything that you're putting out there, all the knowledge that you've taken in, and now the knowledge that you give out is, I mean, to me, that's a shaman. I mean, I'm not huge in
Yeah.
that whole world, but I mean, that's what I would take it as. And that's perfect. That's a great explanation, man.
Because I've been fortunate to be around some Tibetan lamas, some traditional shamans. I live in the American Southwest. And there are a number of cultures still remaining here, although, of course, with the genocidal approach that as Europeans came to the Americas, the indigenous ancient peoples living here were decimated culturally and physically. So, but there's still a continuation of those cultures. And I had the good fortune of meeting and getting to be with some traditional shamans and medicine people, and develop some abilities to, I would say, read their energetic patterns, because nobody wanted to teach, or most traditional people didn't want to teach what they were doing. But if just being in ceremony with them and being in their healing sessions, if you can perceive the energetic patterns, you're learning what they're doing underneath the cultural patterns. Whether you be is mainly Navajo, Hopi, Yaqui cultures that I've had some contact with here in the American Southwest. But it's not, and they're very different cultures, very different cultures. And it was not learning the cultural, those external forms. My perspective is that's not it. I, over years, began to realize it's what the person, what we would call the shaman, a medicine person, is doing energetically. It's unseen. It's just unseen. It's, beating a drum, well, that's not it. It can be helpful. Do we go into the sweat lodge and go clockwise or counterclockwise? That's relevant, but that's not it. I began to observe. And it was tuning into what they were doing energetically and learning via energetically is what was so valuable for me in my own personal development. And that really, to facilitate another person and their limiting functionality energetically or emotionally, psychologically, that psychotherapy can be beneficial, but this underlying energetic pattern that traditional shamans are more likely to do than anybody else, I mean, in terms of general roles. So anyway, the term sexual shaman, which very few people, like I said, would fit that in terms of development, but that is sort of a concept that points in a direction. So that's what excites me today, is developing myself more energetically, regardless of whether it's around sexuality or spirituality. So anyway.
Well, no, with that, Ray, I mean, going back to yourself, I mean, as a single guy, when like, what's it like when you meet someone new? Like, are they intimidated by you with all this sexual prowess or like sexual knowledge and sexual just expertise? Or do you come up with people that are really excited and really receptive to learn new things?
I would say that the only people, no, I'm just a real plain guy. I'm not kinky. I don't come across too weird. I don't think. But the only situation, I have to have caregivers being quadriplegic. And I will say that most caregivers have a tendency to be female, though not necessarily. That the only problem I've had is male partners of female caregivers get sometimes real uptight when they hear about it. I've written all these books, and they feel threatened. Like, I'm not. The books I wrote about were about massage, bathing, how to touch, some things about sexual positions. This is before my neck injury. Well, no, actually, what I learned about before my neck injury, but then I focused on writing about after my neck injury more. That's when I started focusing on that. And it's because I could no longer teach it in terms of practical, hands-on somatic approaches. No, I don't. I would say if someone comes to the door, I have no idea. You have no idea, no idea how far out I am. I think, but I don't come across that way. I don't think. I don't talk about it. I mean, well, if someone's interested, yeah, we'll talk about it. But a lot of people that come to what I'm doing have heard from a friend, or they're happening to be looking up about tantra or sexuality or shamanism, and come across my website, sexualshaman.com. That's interesting. They contact me, and they feel drawn to what they see in their that, and that's how a lot of people come to take classes or courses. Is they just happen to be wanting something. They find my website. They feel intuitively drawn to it, and that's it. Although now with this podcast, hopefully coming out in about a month, September-ish, 2022. Maybe it might go out to a wider audience. So we'll see where it goes. But there are hundreds and hundreds of people doing Tantra these days. So it seems like, so that's not a, I wrote a book entitled The Essential Tantra, as well as the book Erotic Massage, as well as the book Women of the Light, the New Sacred Prostitute. That's like 20, 30 years ago. So sort of gotten newer books have come out in similar topics. But I don't know. It'd be fun to see what happens with this podcast, which is entitled The Sexual Shaman, Conversations on Sexuality and Spirituality. And a lot of very interesting people. Anyway.
Well, no, I know that's gonna be busy. I mean, man, you got so much knowledge in there, and so much to give. And with all the guests you're gonna be bringing on, I know it's gonna be there'll be a lot of information packed in there to unpackage. But
Yeah.
oh, that's great, Ray. I love it. I mean, it's exciting to talk to you. I mean, like you have so much knowledge. It's exciting. Myself, so I bang on a bunch about this. I bang on a lot about masculinity, and the importance of it, in relationship, in family, in life. But how do you define a man, or how do you define masculinity?
Basically, my perspective, because I have a little different perspective than a lot of folks, is I do not find the word masculine and feminine useful. That dichotomy is a limiting dichotomy. And energetically, I think this is what I've come up with, that they're not two genders, there are 7 genders. That with this sort of psychological proclivity, we like to separate male and female biologically, the chromosome factor, that's one thing. But the psychological factor fitting into the different biology brings us into a whole other dynamic. And I, 22 years old, I tried to get a vasectomy because I knew I did not want to be a dad. That's just not my thing. Some people make wonderful parents. I mean, that really is important for them to do that, and I celebrate that. But that was not for me. I'm much more like a monk. But most monasteries and religious traditions are so sex negative. I never found a place that I felt placed to join into. Otherwise, I could probably have been a monk. But this day and time in my situation, I'm in a monastery of one. It seems like. And so it's hard for me to speak to that question because masculine implies conceptually the concept of feminine. And um, there, some people really do fit that general um, inclination of masculine and feminine. But then about 40, 50 years ago, we started hearing more about transgender people. But I didn't feel like any of those categories. And I came up with this understanding or perspective. There's also androgynous male and androgynous female that have sort of like a 50-50 balance of something we might call masculine and feminine. And then there's a seventh category, which I would call, at this point in time, omnigender. A sort of wide range of, there's more of a wide open range of how a person might express. And this is different than sexual orientation. So you have gender and sexual orientation. And someone is inclined to live singly, although I've been in love several times, and it is wonderful. Falling in love with love is great. And I like to live alone, and so most of those relationships were long-distance relationships, which is not an uncommon practice for some people. And given the mobility and internet these days, it's real easy, if you live in different cities and different professions, to live separately, and that'd be quite adequate to have a meaningful relationship. But I love being single. So this masculine, feminine distinction is important, but not for me personally in terms of my own life. So I really can't speak to that very much, because some people, my thought is, follow where you're inclined. You want to be in a focused relationship? That's wonderful. You want to be a parent? That's wonderful. You don't want to be a parent? That's wonderful. If you want to be single or multi-partners, that's wonderful. You have to find what works best for you, not just because society says this is what we should do. And I had to step outside of that perspective early on in my life. And so I would like to point people to the book. Margaret Mead, 1934, came out with a book. She was a well-known anthropologist. She was studying peoples in the islands in the Pacific, and a book entitled Sex and Temperament in Primitive Societies. Primitive, that was the term that was used. It was not, does not have the negative connotation we have now. So it's just another way for saying indigenous people. That's the common term now. So, and what she found, and people, different cultures on an island, not too far apart, one in the ocean, on the sea, one in the mountains, and one in the valley on the other side of the mountain range, that this whole role of masculine and feminine was so different in those three different cultures. These are small cultures, villages, and that what men did in one society was what women did in one of the other societies. I mean, a lot of the roles, a lot of the behavioral patterns. And that was 1934. And of course, Margaret Mead was a pretty awesome person from my perspective. And the anthropologist, PhD, I don't know, was she at Harvard? I don't remember, but she was not a minor leaguer when it came to anthropology and anthropological research. So that book really sort of stood out to me, saying, look, what is masculine, what is feminine is going to be variable. And I would say what's important from over here, and it's different for different people, is what resonates for you, what works for you. And relationships can be great learning experiences, and they can be tough. I love living alone. I have other challenges, and so I really can't speak to the question that I think with any sort of authority, like I could talk about sensuality, but masculine and feminine. But I'm glad people are out there looking at this, because if you're in a focused relationship, what is best for you and in that relationship, and what is best for that relationship. And that's going to be very, very variable. For example, one of the people in the podcast is born male. He is what we thought of as transgender, but he thinks of himself as a she and as a two-spirit. That's the language she uses. And so she stayed in the same relationship with her partner, which is female. And so the way it was sort of described was that now the female, the woman in the relationship, biological woman, now had to, in a sense, since she stayed in relationship with a male to female or both, she had to redefine, her love is now female, so she's now, in effect, lesbian. The shift in all that languaging, as conceptualizing. So, and I support all sexual orientations and all genders, whatever works for you. So that, it's this. I don't see any simple answer to look at the masculinity, and I'm glad you're out there doing it. That's not my forte.
Well, no. Well, thanks, Ray. Thanks for that. Thanks for that answer. Even, I mean, that just opens my eyes to a whole lot more, right? Because I'm very in that manosphere, and that's very black and white world of masculine, feminine, blue chores, pink chores, all that fun stuff, right? So, it's nice to hear, and it's nice to hear a different perspective on things, and be open to the ideas of these different things of everyone, that's everything that's happening, right? And all the different
Yes.
everything's right. And people forget that as well. And I say this to people all the time, is like, I am not a smart man, like intellectually smart. I joke about it. I shouldn't say that ever. Like I pull my weight, but most people and most smart people don't really go back to history, right? Like we don't go back and revisit things, like even like you were just saying, and then 1934 to go back to these tribes and see how different people interact in the different ways that they did it, and to actually have it documented instead of just what do you call it, like guessing or making assumptions about what these past peoples did, right? Like this is actually documented things that people did, so they didn't have to assume that men acted one way and women acted another way. It's very important to get all different perspectives on it. And I really like how you say that too in relationship, right? Like it's different for different people, and
Exactly.
you like being single, that's great. I love being married and I love being a dad. So I mean, it's just different strokes for different folks, right? So
Yes.
I love
Yes,
it,
and I
Ray. I love
celebrate
it.
that. I mean, it's great when I hear people being a parent, a mother, a father. It can be very, very rewarding. I don't think it would have worked for me in this lifetime, at least.
Oh man, that's awesome. Well, speaking of relationships, what are some practical ways that couples in relationships can start to connect sexually, but in a more spiritual way? I mean, most guys I talk to are just, trying to get laid, right? Like they just want to have sex with their
Yeah.
wife, and that's kind of few and far between for most of these guys, just because there's so many other issues and underlying issues on top of
Right?
that. But
I understand. I was on the road. I had many, many horny days on the road or not on the road. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Um, I found that going to well, this is 1973 massage school in San Francisco, which is not perhaps the typical massage school, uh, where I would especially say this to males, given that we're taught to touch with force and intensity, that learning to do massage, learning to be present with touch. See, what Masters and Johnson came in their book in 1966-ish, Human Sexual Response, and a couple of years later, Human Sexual Inadequacy. What they brought in to the psychotherapeutic model of sex therapy was what they called sensate focus. And sensate focus, they would have the couple It can be male, female, male, male, female, female, but let's assume for simplicity, male, female couple, that a person would touch his or her partner and in a certain way, in certain areas, to find out what was a pleasurable touch and in a pleasurable area for that person. So I call that mapping. You map your partner. See, we assume that they're, oh, these simplistic magazines, your 7 erogenous zones. Well, yes, there's certain places have a tendency, but you want to be open to discovering what is really enjoyable for you and your partner at this moment in time, because over time that will change, over circumstances that will change. And so it's not like there's some formula, touch a spot and she will respond that way. Well, that may be a general pattern, but what is more important is to, if you can, let go of the expectation that this is it, and be exploring, and to be present with the touch. And a couple of guidelines there is, one, in most cases, a full hand contact is going to be better than than just a fingertip. But a fingertip in certain situations is perfect. And to be present rather than say, oh, I want to touch here, but I really want to get down there. Down there is where I'm headed. No, no, no. You might discover all sorts of awesome pleasure, and on a shoulder tip, on the shoulder one day. And so let it unfold, and try not to have the intercourse, if that's the general pattern, or orgasm as the objective. Being attached to that outcome, you miss all of the pleasures that can unfold along the way. And sometimes for example, I was in a relationship with a Québécoise, a French-Canadian woman, Louise, for about 5 years. And one evening, she was really horny, but I was just not in the mood. And I said, well, I'm not really feeling sexual for whatever reason, but I'm really willing to be here and hold you, because I like holding her. So that was what would work for me. I held her, and as that longer I held her, I realized, this is nice. I started to get more turned on. So I shifted from not being in the space, which usually we associate with women, not, I have a headache, dear. No, I just was not in that. For whatever reason, I don't remember the specifics. But I wasn't ill. I just didn't, I was just not in the mood that evening. But by being present with her, because we had a real wonderful connection, and really good sex when we had sex, really good, and it sort of just being there, sharing my love for her just by being holding, I got turned on, and we made wonderful love. But the point is, we're trying to be in the moment and adapting to that moment, and without the intense goal focus, allowing it to unfold, no telling where you're going to go. And that's really important, male or female, or male, female. We have so much around expectations. So the last time we did this, it's turned out horribly. Well, try as much as possible to be in the moment. And touch with awareness. And often a full hand touch can be more, but they're not always more enjoyable than a rough, quick going for the crotch, or or wherever other the assumed erogenous zone is. Find this erogenous zone. It's there. So that is some perspectives, at least. But the touch is so important. We do need verbal communication, but if you're with a sexual partner, sex usually involves physical contact, and being present with the touch. It can be so important. That's some summation. That's why, yeah. And I will say that the way they helped me get into that was I was drawn to massage. I went to massage school, but I wasn't focusing on a therapeutic massage. I was like focusing on being present with my partner. Adapted it some, the lover situation, compared to, oh, I have a tight neck. That more of a quote unquote therapeutic focus. It's got to be different, but you got to be present.
Absolutely. And the presence is so huge. I mean, you kind of touched on it even early in your story about working in the porn theater, right? Like after a while you watch porn and you're just looking at it and it's like, it puts all these crazy expectations. I know a lot of men, right? They get the addiction to porn, get addiction to everything to numb out and get out of this world that we're in. But take porn, for example, then they bring that or try to bring that into the bedroom, right? And try to do these things, but they're not in the moment and they're almost like it's putting on a performance
Yes.
for whatever, not for your partner, for something else, right? And just not being present, being in the moment. And then most of these guys now, I'm finding out, young guys too are having real problems with or with erections because they're feeling not enough because of the porn actors. They're feeling not enough because they can't do what those guys can do, and it's really affecting a real life situation and being present with their woman, right? And it's pretty detrimental. And again, everything always goes back to that, right? Like just be in the moment, have fun, and just lose yourself in that. And especially when you find that right partner, right? And just to be able to be open and free and have that expression instead of trying to put on some big, well, just putting on a facade, right? And it's not
Yep.
fun for
Yep.
anybody. No, that's great. That's really important. I like how you say that, be present, because especially we get in these long-term relationships and with marriages, I mean, sex can obviously seem like a chore.
Yeah.
You're trying to do like work around the kids, you're busy, you're stressed out from work, bills, everything else. And then, okay, well, I got 5 minutes, let's go have sex. And then it's not like, what is that, right? Like, I mean, um, it's just not fulfilling. And like, for me anyway, I guess I should speak for myself. For me, it's just like, what's the point? And there's no point in doing that. I'd rather connect,
Yeah.
and this is gonna take some time, right? And I want to be in the moment. So it's it's interesting to hear from your perspective. I really enjoy this. It's a great conversation, man.
Yeah.
Um,
Let me,
with
let me say one thing. A couple of secrets, because I've known people in the porn industry a little bit, not a whole lot, uh, and a couple of those things. One, when you're filming, if you don't have an erection, you turn the cameras off and wait till you have an erection. Two, I don't know to what extent it happens now, but back when I worked in the porn theater, I knew the porn industry people had a woman in the role called fluffer, where her role was to do oral sex to get the male actor erotically aroused and with a erect penis, so that he could do what he had to do to in the filming. So uh, in your personal life, you're not going to have, oh, hold the cameras here, everybody take a break, and bring on the fluffer.
Well, no, now the fluffer is a little blue pill, right? But I mean, that
Oh,
has its
okay.
purpose.
See,
And
I'm out of the times these days.
yeah, well, that has its purpose. I understand and I get that, but I mean, needing that when you're 20 is not the answer, right? So I mean,
Yeah,
there's
I
definitely
agree.
something
Yeah,
wrong. But no, that's great. That's a really good perspective of putting that. There's not a lot of romance going on when there's cameras all over the place and
yeah.
everything else happening. So no, that's awesome, buddy. What well, with that being said, with relationships with anybody, what I know you already talked about with touch and being present, especially being touched with a full hand, an open hand. What would one more or two more of your, what would be kind of be the silver bullet that you've seen all these years now as as another great way to connect, or another really good tip in the bedroom. We'll pull it.
I found, I can't say this is a silver bullet by any means, but bathing, uh, uh, something about soap and water, could even be in a shower, but in a bathtub, is just the slipperiness, the running water. Uh, I know massage is sort of the go-to practice, but showering and bathing to just enjoy. Soap and water makes makes touching easier and flow with the touch. So that's not that well, not often spoken of, but that's one thing that I think is useful. I'm such a meditator. I spend 2 to 4 hours a day doing various forms of meditation and energetic focusing, which is it could generally be called meditation. But you have to be a little experienced with this. Being with a partner and meditating with your partner, just to sort of get into to sync. Being present within oneself, so that one doesn't rush into it. The action, I think, is very beneficial. But if you're not experienced in meditation, this suggestion wouldn't be very useful. If you're sitting there thinking, "Oh, I can't wait till 5 minutes is up, so we can go really do it." I think meditation. And if you become energetically developed, sort of like along towards the sexual shaman idea, you might be able to be on the telephone with your partner across the country and start to have energetic orgasms simultaneously over the telephone. That's a trip. But that's not, some people do it quite spontaneously without any development, and some people, you do a lot of meditation over the years and you learn to connect in certain ways. And I will say that there are different types of phenomena that I call orgasm. One is a sexual orgasm, which male often has ejaculation, female might have ejaculation. But, maybe 30, 40 years ago, it was very popular to talk about extended orgasm for men or multiple orgasm for men. Well, it wasn't a sexual orgasm. There's another energetic structure that I call the light body, that you can develop that with breathing, and you can have these huge explosions, which are like orgasm, but they might be in the head, in the throat, in the chest, or the whole body, rather than it may or may not be within ejaculation. It may or may not be within sexuality, but learning to do that with a partner, or even at long distance, can be real trippy. But the people to talk about that usually would be tantric teachers, but I can't really suggest tantric teachers because most of them, from my perspective, they can talk the talk, but they can't walk the talk. Unfortunately, some teachers are really good, but it's so popular now and diffused that you can't say, I can't say, go to a tantra teacher. No, unfortunately. But I'm simply saying there are other ways to connect energetically that can be orgasmic. But that means you got to get into the meditation and focused awareness, which may or may not involve physical touch. But that's a possibility. And some people do that already automatically. They're just somehow just there. And think they're weird because they go into... it happens in the Pentecostal church. The preacher, you get the call or response. The preacher is saying something, the audience is say, amen. And you have the drummer and the organ and the pianist pounding away this primordial beat. And some people just go into an explosive orgasm with God. The there's a 16th century nun named Sister Teresa of Avila, a Spanish Catholic nun who would go into these ecstatic moments. I first heard like doing cartwheels across the floor. Why she was never burned at the stake, I don't know. But somehow the way the history comes down is that she was perceived as communing with God, connecting with God, and she'd have this ecstatic, explosive experiences. And that to me, well, yeah, you can call it God, or it's something happening energetic with yourself, or your partner across the country, or a partner across the room. There's so much more depth to go into, but that's not where most people are to go into that. And so I don't know. I'm saying this maybe because I lived in San Francisco and been around the block with so many different teachers and situations that I begin to understand and can experience this. But it does take development over time. Masturbation and sexual intercourse make it a little bit easier.
I like it, right? Because you're just opening up a can of there. It's never ending, right? And I mean, this is just
Yes.
ongoing learning that you can just go
Yes.
into. And I mean, this is a great example too of, grab your partner's hand and jump into this together and get into that learning together and
Yes.
fall down that rabbit hole, right? And I mean, it can just go on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
And so much pleasure along the way, right? I mean, there's going to be a lot of
Yeah.
self work in there. There's going to be a lot of what do you call it?
Yes.
Like peeling back the layers of those onions and dealing with some things. But man, there's going to be so much pleasure along the way. Oh, that's great, Ray. Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little bit on you here though now and on
That's
everybody
all
else.
right.
But so I know you wrote a lot of books. You've mentioned your books. I mean, selling over 1 million copies of books is no small achievement. So I mean, especially self-publishing, one of your more popular ones, erotic massage. Um, with that, like, what beliefs did you have to challenge in yourself to be able to publish that? And I mean, to sell as many as you did. I mean, it takes a lot there.
I came in at the right place at the right time. So this would have been, I think, 1985-ish. You had the porn genre getting legitimate, had been legitimized, and there were these adult bookstores, they were called, but they were mainly oriented towards males and stimulating material, mainly for probably being purchased for masturbatory stimulation, which is fine if that's your thing. But about this time, more and more what I would call sensuous boutiques became opening up for couples and more focused on attracting women, given female perspectives around sexuality as a general cultural perspective. And here I came in with this book, which was not a porn book, but it was the first book to illustrate massage that included the genitals. Some other books did come out in around 1972, that talked about massage and even talked about erotic massage, but did not illustrate it. I said, why is no one illustrating it? So I illustrated it. I mean, you actually saw hands on genitalia, but in a very non-porn-like feeling. And I brought that to the sensuous boutiques. They ate it up all around the country. There was a business opening up. People were finding it was opening. More and more women were embracing their sexual nature and the culture, their sexual aspect, and expressing themselves. And this was a book that appealed in tone to couples and women. And so as that industry came along, I came along. After a while, though, some mainstream publishers said, "Oh, we can do this." So they even pissed me off, used the exact name I use, erotic massage, and came out with their own version of it, of that. It's fine if you want to, you know, I moved past the lot gates, and then others found, oh, you can get through the gates now. But then use a different title, slightly different title. It irked me. But anyway, so there are a number of books out there now where the title erotic massage. But I self-published it because no one else would publish it. There was the computer had just came into your what was it, laser printer, so you could print it out yourself. I mean, you could get the foundation, and you could do it all yourself on your little Macintosh. I wrote the book on the Macintosh, and you put it on the laser printer had just come out, so I took that then to printers. Some printers would not print it. Took me a while to find a printer. Oh, we can't just show this. But I found a printer that did, and slowly took off, and other publishers found, oh, you can get away with this now, huh? Okay, so they did some good books out there, erotic massage. But I will say, I went where no person had gone before. As far as instruction, not just a porn version, but a real instructional video with the feeling and compassion. Eventually I did a male and a female version as well. Femme erotic massage and male erotic massage, as well as erotic massage. If you wanted that and you can find it, it's also in the Essential Tantra, same book, but in a compilation called the Essential Tantra. The Essential Tantra is available online as a printed book and an ebook. I just recently saw it because I downloaded my own ebook so I have a copy of it.
That's awesome. When you when you were doing all that, was that very obviously self-publishing? Like, were you full on entrepreneur mode, or were you
Yeah,
like, they had to
yeah.
set up the
I
business, you had
went
to
to
do
about
all that?
I went to about 8 different friends and say, "Can you loan me $1,000? This is what I want to do." So 8 people, and I was paying 15% interest a year, something like that. And but they had high interest times at that time, and fortunately, it took off, and I was able to pay back everybody. Yeah, I was entrepreneur, and no one told me I could not do it. I was in California, and yeah, some printers said no, but I found ways around that. So there's such a around sexuality, and then certain presidents and their they really got into their evangelical religious morality thing around sexuality and became more oppressive. And that's still oppressive around sexuality. If you're doing something around sexuality, banks won't give you a merchant account, and YouTube won't show something. So we are not sexually free in this culture. I mean, I'm talking about the U.S. American culture now. But it is much more than when I grew up in the 1950s, because I was born in 1944, and the birth control pill really kicked out the jams and opened up gates. And then the hippie days said, no, women should not be restricted to only this type of a role. And it's an egalitarian thing here with males and females and different sexual orientations to be sexually expressive in ways consuming consensuality, in ways that feel inclined, you can find somebody else to dance with. And so I lived pre-sexual revolution, through the sexual revolution, and things got better and then they shut down more. But, that's just how cultures go up and down.
Man. Well, Ray, I love talking to you about all these topics. I can go on and on. We can talk for days. I think we'll have to do this again. But where can people get more from you? Where can they find you?
Well, the easiest one to remember is sexualshaman.com. My main focus is on this energy training, so it doesn't look like sexuality, but it's very much based on sexuality, with influences from shamanism, Tibetan Buddhism, and various forms of spiritual and meditative approaches. And it's not religious. And shortly after this podcast, hopefully within a month, I'll have a little more depth with some very interesting people talking about some of the same ideas I was just talking about.
Awesome, buddy. Well, like I say, thank you for this. I could talk to you for days. I really appreciate your time, and we'll have to do this again. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate your receptivity and your openness to, man, we just have to keep open and growing and open. And, this is a possibility. Yeah. To embrace what we're unfamiliar with and embrace what we may have felt limited about in the past, and see how it fits for us at this point in our life. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Check out our offerings on social media at The Revived Couple and online at therevivedcouple.com. Have a request for a show topic? We love that. Send us an email at michael@larocklife.com or DM at The Revived Couple.
And don't forget to rate, subscribe, and review.